This is part two to my message I began last week on love, connection, and nakedness. How many of you were here for that? Yeah. If you weren't, don't worry. Just kind of bring you a summary of what I brought in this year of love that I believe that God's invited us into. My kind of sense going into it was like, yay, oh no. That was kind of my genuine sense as I was praying about the coming year. The yay part was, yay, the love of God. We all want more of that in our lives. But he was wanting to write that on our hearts. And the way that he was doing that, or at least of what I was getting a sense of what he, of his approach was, he was going to show us the way of the cross. And what it cost him, and what love looked like through him. So this felt like an invitation to black belt type love, as opposed to yellow belt love. And many of us have been Christians for a long time, and we've experienced the love of God, but there's degrees and depths to the love of God. And the longer we go on with the Lord, the more he wants us to look and smell and be him more and more increasingly in our lives. That's the ultimate goal of discipleship, is to be Jesus to the world through our own unique personalities and giftings and wirings, and through our agenda that God handpicked for us when he created. He had all of that in mind. And as we go on with the Lord and he transforms us, we reflect him more in the world. And so in this journey of loving like God, he wants to show us the paths that he walks. And the owie, scary part to that is that means going to day 2 in our journeys, or his journey through the cross. Because there was something extraordinary in that, was where love was most visibly displayed. And it's great when we think about what he does, but in order for us to love like him, there's pieces of ourselves that need crucifying. Yeah, there's pieces of us that need to die. Sometimes we need to go through death or experience death at the hands of other people in order to get to grips with the love of God. And it frightens the bejesus out of me, because that was the most difficult thing that he did. He sweat drops of blood in anticipation of what he was about to do. And so I never did karate or judo or stuff like that, because I was told you could get demonized doing those things growing up. Anyone else get told that? Yeah, I don't believe that anymore. Yeah, because you're not worshiping another God, you're just learning self-defense. But I can remember I stayed away from that. But the visual imagery going through the grades is harder and harder and harder and harder. And I believe it's not just a lifetime journey, it's an eternity journey that we're invited into in growing to become like Jesus. Because he's infinite, yeah? He's infinite. So this is just the start of it. And I believe that with every invitation to more of God, there is a grace that goes along with it. So you're in the right place at the right time, and you're in the right circumstances that set you up in your life for what he is growing in you. He's just the master at being able to order the world, order your life, order the events of your life to create the perfect environment for those things to take place. And I say that because I know some of you, with what you've shared with me vulnerably, are going through really hard stuff. And all of those things have a purpose in his plan. It's not that he creates them, he allows them to happen. Can't figure out exactly how he does his God stuff, but he's just a genius at that. Yeah. So love is what he's growing in us this year. And last week I began my message by looking at the garden story of where he hardwired humanity, the original humanity, and made us a love machine. And we looked at the garden story, or 25 verses of it. I'm not going to reread it, but the 25 verses from the end of Genesis chapter 2 right through to the end of Genesis chapter 3. And what I reflected was something that I learned a couple of years back, was that nakedness is all over those 25 verses in a way I hadn't previously noticed before. The theme of nakedness appears, I think it was 6 times, 4 directly, 1 in a hidden way, and no, it's 5 times, and then 1 indirectly. So this theme of nakedness is key in these verses to what it means to be truly human. Truly human. And to be truly human means to reflect him. When we are the fullness of who God's made us in our humanity, I want to propose to you, we are reflecting the image of God in its most glorious sense. Does that make sense? It's maybe a new thought for you, because very often the church has taught us to be most spiritual to display God. But actually, Jesus came, the God, second son, the second person of the Trinity came in flesh, and he was fully God, and he was fully human. And there's something about being fully human in the way that God originally designed that reflects more than anything the image of God in our world. And I have a book that I want to write one day called Becoming Human, because ultimately I believe that is our mission, is to become the fullness of who he's made us to be. So God, do that in us, God. We pray. We want to kind of journey into that. And so last week I shared how nakedness seems to be a key to becoming fully human in our lives. And I kind of looked at that, and there's the visual side of that. No visualizations, please. But like when we think about that, we think about, being bare, kind of unclothed. But in the garden story, whilst there's that piece, it's a metaphor, it's a picture of something that was present both before and after the fall, and our relationship with our nakedness and one another's nakedness changed because of the fall. Pre-fall, there was something about our nakedness that allowed a level of vulnerability and seeing of ourselves to one another, where the deepest, darkest recesses of our being and who God made us to be, the good and the pieces that we struggle with ourselves. It was easy pre-fall to reveal those to one another and to be received by the people that we shared with, in a way that actually that unveiling was where the chemistry for the one fleshness happened. This deep, intimate connection that's described at the end of Genesis chapter 2, where the 2 people that God made become one person. And the key was the embracing of one another's nakedness. And it's in that experience, this being able to get real, deeply real and authentic with one another, that there's something connected with that releases this vision of God amongst the world. And what we saw last week was that the snake is described in Hebrew as being naked. You remember that? That was surprising. In Genesis chapter 3, the snake in our English translations is described as being cunning. Cunning, yes? The snake was cunning. The word translated cunning, the Hebrew word, is naked. It's the same word as used of Adam and Eve. And the snake was cunning in the sense that there's a similarity between being cunning and deceitful as well as being naked. They're actually two sides of the same coin. So the snake, in his cunningness, was holding back truth of who he is. And when Adam and Eve, he had ulterior motives. There was a hidden side of him that wasn't being brought through. And so he gave the appearances of being naked. But he wasn't truly naked. There was a slyness and there was an agenda behind what he was doing. And when we ate from the fruit of the tree of good and evil, we thought we would get upgrades in a different way. But what it did was it impacted how we feel about our nakedness. After the fall, our ability to be truly vulnerable with one another terrified us. And I shared how the word used in the text doesn't say Adam and Eve noticed that they were naked and they felt ashamed. No, the word that's in the text in chapter 3 is they were terrified of their nakedness. And what happened because of that, the two people that became one flesh were suddenly able not to connect because they weren't able to bring the fullness of who God made them to be. The things that were hidden in the shadows were no longer able to be brought forward freely, and the one of the two became two again. The one flesh became two. And the result in this is that our world has an epidemic of loneliness. Okay, I want to dive some more into this text today. And where I want to get to today is I want to actually unpack what the text shows us about how to get back to being able to be naked, comfortably naked, with ourselves and one another in a metaphorical sense. No one show up next week naked. Yeah. That was not your mission. All right. So how do we connect in a broken world? The first thing, I've only got 2 points to my message. The first point is follow the breadcrumbs. Yeah. You know what I mean by breadcrumbs, yeah? Things left on the ground to get back to where you came from. What are the breadcrumbs that we see in the Genesis story? I've mentioned already about loneliness. And just for your reference again, interestingly enough, the only thing on the good side of creation before the fall happens that God says, and God self-discloses that wasn't good, was Adam's aloneness. It's not good for Adam to be alone. And a guy called Jeff Benner with 3 Fs there, do you see on the screen? Yeah, that's a typo. He translates this verse, it's not good for the existence of Adam to be alone. Why would God create, God who's perfect, create Adam alone if he knew it wasn't good for his existence? And given that when he created the world, he created everything in pairs. Why would he do that? Yeah, I don't know if you've kind of allowed your brain to go there. My brain goes to these places. And what I've concluded is, well, God is perfect. There must have been a strategy and a reason behind him choosing to do this. Yeah, especially because aloneness was not goodness, and aloneness is painful. Okay, and before I get to why I think God chose to do this, I want to show you some other perplexing things as well, which you've maybe not thought about this passage. Okay, what was the solution that God identified for Adam's aloneness? How was he going to solve this problem that he created? What was his solution to Adam's aloneness? Create Eve. There you go. Gold star. Yeah. He needed Eve to solve his aloneness. Yeah. He needed his perfect mate and match. And when you read the text, God says this. He says, okay, it's not good for man to be alone. I'm going to make him a helper suitable for him. And so God says, I'm going to solve this problem that I've created here by creating Adam a helper. And the word helper here is the same word that is used of God elsewhere in Scripture in his relationship with humanity. So very often people have portrayed this word to mean that women are secondary to men. But no, God uses this term of himself in his relationship with humanity. And God ain't second fiddle to us, is he? So, and I just highlight this because very often theology has been built out of this to say women are second place to men. It doesn't mean that. International Women's Day, by the way, yesterday. Yeah, we celebrate our women. And women are created co-equal, co-image bearer, sharers with man, and together they were reflectors of God's glory. And so we love our women in the unique way that God has made you to reflect him. So God sets about solving this issue of Adam's aloneness. Now, what would you think would be the next logical thing that you would do if you were God and you knew that you had to solve this problem, and that you knew that the answer to Adam's problem was an Eve? What would you do next? Yeah, make Eve. That's right, Wayne, Gold Star. But the text shows us God doesn't do this. He doesn't do this. What's the very next thing that he does? Here we go. Now the Lord God formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky, and he brought them, and Jewish rabbis think in 2 by 2, he brought them to man to see what he would name them, and whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. Huh? What the heck, God? What are you doing? Why would you do that? That's just like the bizarrest. And it's bizarre still, because when you actually think about it, what is naming involved in someone? How many of you have got kids here? Yeah. You know the wrestle of naming a kid. Like, and you belabor over this, and you're trying to kind of capture their essence, who you want the child to be. A lotto winner or whatever. I know kind of I make jest. Yeah. You think deeply and you pray deeply into who it is that your child is. And in a similar way, Adam is confronted with these animals that come in 2 by 2. He peers into their uniqueness and not just sees the fact that there's a dog or a cat or a giraffe or a mouse or a lizard and things. He sees with each of these animals something he doesn't have in himself. They come in a pair. They're one. And by the end of this exercise, it's not just God saying there's no suitable helper here to be found. Adam is feeling that in his bones. Yeah? Each animal that comes just reinforces his aloneness. Bizarre. What the heck is God up to? Why would God do that? That seems almost cruel, doesn't it? To reinforce something like that. And I actually want to suggest to you, God knew what he was doing. And what he was actually doing was this: classical conditioning. Have you heard of classical conditioning? Yeah, classical conditioning. How many of you, when you leave this building and go upstairs and you walk out through the lobby, the smell from Denny's wafts through and you start salivating. Be honest, how many of you, yeah, Alexis, yep, over there, yep, numbers of you, and you're like, oh, burgers, fries, pancakes, or whatever it is. You start dreaming about these things. That is classical conditioning at play, yep. It's something, it's a subconscious response to a stimulus. It's in us, and we all have these, and we have them in the positive sense, and we can have them in the negative sense. How many of you, when I mention this word, some of you are going to have a traumatic response, okay? Okay, dentist drill. Yeah, that's classical conditioning. You could just hear the noise of a drill, and you like start trembling. That's classical conditioning. There's a subconscious response to a stimulus, being the noise, which sets off a reaction. And it's, as scientists have discovered, you can train monkeys or dogs or animals, whereby you can train an automatic response in them to elicit a particular kind of a response to a stimulus. And there's a famous experiment, the originator in modern times of this classical conditioning was a guy called Gustav Pavlov. And there was a famous experiment that he had with dogs, where he noticed that before he fed his dog, it would begin to salivate at the smell of food. And what he tried to figure out was, could he add in an extra stimulus there to actually see if the dog would react in a way that he wanted? So before preparing a meal, he would hit a bell, bing, and then he would prepare the food and feed the dog, and the dog would and scoff all the food, gobble it up. And then what he did this after a time, and each time the bell would ring, the dog would begin to salivate. Eventually, he removed the food, rang the bell, the dog would salivate. It got hardwired into him. I want to propose to you that God hardwired into humanity, us all, an aversion to loneliness. Why? Because he knew what was coming. He knew the fall was coming, and he knew that actually the image of God in us was most visibly seen in humanity when there was a deep connection between people. And so he hardwired into us all a hunger to connect. A hunger. We have an aversion to loneliness. The recoil for that is to go and find connection. When I say follow the breadcrumbs are, if you have loneliness in you, that's your breadcrumb, because the solution to loneliness is connection. If you have an ache of loneliness in your being, God hardwired it in there, and it speaks to you of your need to find connection. Because ultimately, at the end of the road of the breadcrumbs, where you find connection with a person or people, that's the fulfillment of who God made you to be. He made you to be connected. All right, this is important because many of us try and numb our loneliness, escape from our loneliness, but it's a gift from God to help you find connection with one another. That was good. All right, here's another thing. Okay, so how do we solve our aversion to nakedness? We have to enter through the heart. So when Eve was made from Adam, the piece of his being, the Bible describes, that God fashions Eve out of is translated as bone. But the actual Hebrew word is translated side. The same word is, I don't think, ever translated as bone elsewhere in the Bible, although it appears numbers of times. Most commonly, it refers to things like a side of a tent. It's the same word as bone here. So when God makes Adam, Eve from Adam, he takes a piece of Adam's side. And what particular side of him does God take? So it's not a universal belief, but I think it's probable, and I don't know quite how this worked, but many scholars believe that when Adam was first created alone, he was androgynous. Do you know what androgynous means? He was both male and female. I'm not saying biologically, but in his makeup. Yep. And so when God takes a piece of Adam's side, what side does he take? His effeminate side. And he fashions Eve out of Adam from Adam's effeminate side. And so men and women are not just biologically different. We're largely the same in many areas, but there are not always, but commonly distinctions between how we think, how we're wired, and things. What are those main differences? Men tend to be more what? Logical. Not that women aren't, but so if I'm offending you, please don't stone me.
We do multitasking.
You do. We don't have that word in our vocabulary as men. You can multitask, and apparently that's to do with your the way that God has designed your brains, the ability to do that. Men tend to be what focused? Task focused. We can only do one thing at a time. Yeah, and then what's some of the other things that are different, importantly different? Yeah, I think women seem to have a greater capacity for emotions than and nurturing than men. Not always, but commonly. And I think that there's some of the distinctions that God had when he created these two different sexes, genders and sexes. And they're unique to us, and we need them both together. Well, here's the thing. In this passage, Adam loses a piece of himself, and then gets it back. But it's not that he gets his side back. He gets this through his Eve. He literally comes back together again. So God creates one individual, then two. And then in this unique magic that happens through this nakedness, being real with one another at a depth, there is this beautiful interconnectedness that happens so much that they're infused and they become one flesh again. Adam literally finds himself in his Eve. Again, he gets the fullness of his heart back, and he there's this beautiful. It's beautiful. I can imagine it's almost spontaneously comes out of Adam when this happens. Now this is the bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. It's just, what is this? What is this? It's not even logical. Like there's no logic in what he's saying here. It's the language of poetry, isn't it? This is poetry, which is the language of love. Yeah. Okay, here's the thing. Connection, although it involves our entire beings, is not primarily logical. It's actually a heart language. It's an emotional language. You hear the songs that are uttered today, brought up today. They're all pictures of love. They're all describing emotions. The language of love is primarily an emotional thing. It's beyond words. We try and find words that fit it because it's a thing of emotion. And so the way for true connection to happen is we need to actually reach our emotions with one another. After the fall, that thought is terrifying. We try, the picture of Adam and Eve hiding from God, covering up their nakedness, is a symbol of us protecting ourselves from the deepest recesses of our being. We don't want those exposed to God and to one another. And our world has become expert in hiding and protecting and numbing from those aspects of our beings. Yeah, we are disconnected from our hearts. And to the degree that which we are disconnected from our hearts, it inhibits true connection. You can be married with someone. You can have sex with the person. I said the S word. You can have sex with the person you're married to and even reach ecstatic heights through that experience. But you can be incredibly disconnected. It can just be a bodily function and experience. And there can be absolutely zero connection in that experience. Because what has happened is the faculty that's needed for that connection to happen is we're shut off from. I share that because I know that. I share that because I know that. I majored on disassociating from my heart as a kid. I grew up in a family that taught me emotions, boys aren't emotional. I was taught that bad emotions were bad. Can't be angry. When I became a believer age 13, in my head, I wrongly interpreted, I cannot allow anger to be in my heart because that's not Christian. You can't be a Christian and be angry with that. So I learned how to separate my pieces of my heart that sometimes felt strong emotion, and I put it in the deepest, darkest dungeon in the recess of my soul, and I threw the key away. And to everyone out there, I looked like the most wonderful Christian who never got cross, never got upset, was always smiling, always kind. But I was the oldest son in the parable of the prodigal son story. Yeah, the good son. Ticked all the boxes, did all the right things, squeaked and sounded like the church thought I should be, or I thought the church wanted me to be. But I was lying to myself. And there was a whole dark dungeon where the voice was so far away that its cries that were coming out weren't heard. But here's the thing about when we are shut off from our hearts. Our hearts will force their way to the surface. They will show up through us, through other ways. Because emotions need to be expressed, they will find a way to the surface in us. Yeah? When you think in today's world, the epidemic of the various kinds of addictions out there are manifestations of loneliness in our world. The aloneness, the hurting, the lonely parts, the unresolved parts of our being. And they are trying to be met. And we try and meet those through illegal means. And what we think we need to do in response to that is to actually discipline the life out of these things, to crucify the flesh. But what we don't realize we're doing is, no, we don't need to crucify those pieces. We need to do what Jesus did, which was to embrace the lonely aspects of our being. To the woman caught in adultery, what was his response? It wasn't, I'm going to crucify you with a stone. I'm going to throw stones at you. No, he met her with compassion and love. Yeah? And he showed his love and compassion to that woman, which is a metaphor I'm using here for those pieces in our dark dungeons. So we need to get comfortable with bringing stuff out of ourselves. Another piece in my journey was in my journey of discovering and getting comfortable with my nakedness, my emotions. I discovered that it's not something you can logically be taught how to do. You cannot read a book that says, step one, you must do this and this and this, because that is this faculty. In order to reach our hearts, you have to drop anchor. You have to drop anchor. You need to allow yourself to begin to leave space for the things in you, both good and troubling, to allow themselves to surface. And you need to allow yourself to be, and this is perhaps the hardest piece in this journey. You need to allow yourself to embrace difficult emotions. Yeah, as we've been learning at Legends, emotions aren't bad. They're just lights on the dashboard. They're just indicators of things. But for me growing up, I was terrified of strong emotions. I was terrified because I wasn't taught and nurtured how to handle those. And that's why I disassociated from that. The issue for me was I couldn't cry. My dad died at 56, which is super young, of terrible cancer. And at his funeral, everyone was crying because it was tragic. I just couldn't cry. I was like, what the heck's wrong with me? I couldn't cry. Because I was afraid if I let the pain come up, it would kill me. I was deeply scared of it. And so in this journey where I reached a place in my life where I started to go on this journey with God to discover human connection that involved getting in touch with my heart. I had to get in touch with some of these troubling emotions. And it was scary. Honestly, it was scary. Because I'd never been taught how to handle them. And what I've learned is I thought I would be consumed. I thought I would be literally swallowed by these things. And what I've recognized is they just need to be acknowledged. You literally need to turn and acknowledge your emotions as they come up. And we've been learning some language around this in recent weeks and at the discipleship school. I see you, fear. I see you, sadness. I see you, anger. And there's another aspect to this, okay? Because I want to show you this. Because when you first get going on this, it's going to be a little bit mechanical, okay? You're going to have to remember, much like when you started to learn how to drive, mirror, signal, shoulder check maneuver, yeah? You remember that? And you're going to go through those things as you're doing it. As you're learning the language of the heart, there's some things that you that we're learning, we're giving you. I see the feeling. I meet the need. Yeah, see the need, meet the need. Those things are helpful. But the thing that is going to meet these most fully is when you allow yourself to resonate with the emotion that is associated with them. Can I keep going a bit longer? Yeah? All right, some of you like, please. All right, I want to show you this. Okay, this is important. Okay, when you get going with this, first of all, I want you to kind of picture this as either two people or even yourself, meeting yourself. It could be both. both and here. But I'm using two different people here. You've got one on the right-hand side of the screen in the green bubble, and the man is feeling alone, and the woman is in the pink bubble. She's in her happy space. And the white dot in the middle is the dividing wall with them. And as I've explained already, this is most of humanity. They're alone in their emotions. And they're feeling alone in their emotions. And when you feel alone, it's stinking horrible. And so there's a pain associated with this. Now, in the Christian world, we teach this level of connection with one another. Okay, we go, oh, person, they're kind of acting a bit weird here. And we try and go through the process of maybe talking with them. Tell me what's going on. We learn language of how to begin to decipher the strange behavior, because most painful behavior comes out as weirdness around people, yes? The people that act the weirdest are the ones very often most in pain. Yeah, it comes out. It's going to come out in weirdness. So we learn as Christians to go, okay, that weirdness, it's not about me. I'm not going to judge that. Something going on for them. What is going on for them? And we go through these steps, logically go, and we may ask questions and decipher, oh, they're probably alone. And we may even ask them, hey, are you feeling alone? Now, the thing about this is we can do this just purely from a mind level with one another. That's good. That's where we first get going in this connection piece. But here's the thing about that. If we do these steps with one another and people in the world, people will still be alone in their space because they're alone in their experience of that space. And as nice as it is at first to feel like I can see you, I can see what's going on for you, we can still be alone in our experience. You remember oneness? The one fleshness of Adam and Eve was this emotional connection. See, what I'm describing here on the screen is what social researchers called sympathy. Sympathy. And there's a big difference between sympathy and empathy. Okay. Whoops. Hang on a minute. Let me find this. What's the difference? Let me find this in my notes. A very similar word comes from the Greek, sympathy and empathy. All right. So sympathy literally means with. So you are with someone, but empathy is deeper. It means you are in something with them. Okay, this distinction, if you can get this, I've shared a lot, but if you can get this, this will be the most powerful weapon that you have for yourself and the people out there in the world. Okay. This is the stuff that creates connection at a mystical level. Like just, this is more powerful than nuclear weapons because most of the world lives disconnected because they're not met in their emotions. I want to show this, what this looks like. Okay, you remember this bubble? All right. The green is the emotion. He's emoting his aloneliness. It's coming out of him. It smells like something, if you could see it in the spirit. And she's emoting a different kind of emotion. Connection happens when this happens. Okay, you don't just think what's going on. You begin to do this. You begin to allow yourself to feel with the person. You start feeling what they're feeling. Now, for some of you, that's like an overwhelming thought. What the heck? I have to feel their sadness or their aloneness? I don't want to do that because that disturbs me. That's scary. That's dark. Well, I'm a Christian. Hope, love, peace, joy. What do you mean I have to do? No. Romans says, laugh with those that laugh, mourn with those that mourn. Yeah? It's talking about how to undo the curse in our world. The curse of loneliness, which is the biggest fallout of the fall. When we can actually resonate with other people's emotions, there's something amazing that happens. This is what happens. They're no longer alone in that. And guess what? No words are needed in that. It's the most profoundly human, divine, holy experience that you can have with another person. It's so profoundly intimate that angels, I'm sure, start singing when they see this happen with people. I want to end with this story. How many of you would like that? Yeah? Yeah. Honestly, it's profound. Sue Johnson she died, I think, last year. She was a marriage therapist, and she was trained in her day in how to help couples that were struggling. And as part of her PhD, she did a study on connected and disconnected couples. And she put these probes on the couple's heads and got them to interact with one another. And she wanted to see what was happening inside of their heads when they were relating. And so with the first group, the disconnected couples, she put these probes on their head. And what she observed is, as they were talking and connecting, these disconnected couples would have different parts of their brains light up, and they would kind of flash as they were talking. And then she did the same experiment on connected couples. And what she discovered was, in a bizarre, mystical kind of a way, and she wasn't a Christian, she observed that the same parts of their brain would light up simultaneously as they were engaging. She was like, what the heck is that? That's amazing. And she termed it emotional resonance. They were emoting at the same frequency. They were attuned to one another's feelings and on the same page as each other's feelings. So much it would show up in their body. There was a oneness connected. She called this synchrony. There was this synchronization in one another. And in that place of connection, and she noted this with the disconnected couples, they could be talking about the same things, they could be doing all the same things, but the connection wasn't there. Why? Because connection ultimately is a heart-to-heart thing, and that piece was missing in these other couples. And so she learned how to do this. And actually studies have shown, in terms of couples therapy, emotional focused therapy is the most successful couples therapy out there when you can learn this. And most of couples fights she discovered was this protest from one another that came out in three distinct ways of this disconnect that they were feeling. I'm alone, I'm alone, I'm alone. And because I'm alone, it's going to come out in anger. It's going to come out with distance. It's going to come out with me taking a step closer and me taking a step close back. It was what she called primal scream. Primal scream. Because aloneness is not goodness. And so when she taught couples to connect at that emotional level, they were suddenly not alone in their issue, in their feeling. And suddenly they felt one. Okay. The journey, and this is where I'm landing the plane today, is it has to start with us. It has to start with us. In my journey of connection, it had to be that I had to get in touch with this piece of my life that I was deathly scared of. And it began with me being honest. God, don't know how to do this. Teach me how to walk into these places. And Jesus has been to the deepest, darkest recesses of human experience. And he can show us the way. Yeah, he'll hold our hand. He says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. And he can show us how to reclaim the pieces of our being that God wants to reconcile to us. You remember the scriptures say it's a ministry of? Yeah. Key piece is we need to reconcile the fragmented pieces of our lives. All right. Can you stand? I want to pray. I know I went a little bit long. God, for many of us, that sounded like a foreign language, Arabic or Chinese. But our hearts are going, yes, 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 yes. Oh, pause prayer. Genesis, after the fall, God says one thing to Adam. He says, where are you? Yeah? He's talking to the hidden pieces. Some of us have pieces saying, I'm over here. Hello, hello, hello. And here's the key thing. You're going to go, I promise, any second now. Just bear with me. When you start lifting the lid on this, sometimes it's a scream that comes out. Because it's been trying to scream so loud for such a long time. And it can feel overwhelming to begin to lift the lid. I release a grace to you for that. Yeah, you're not going to die. You're not going to be consumed. But you need to lean in to that. Sit with the emotion. God, give us a grace and teach us how to do that. And Lord, help us to be great connectors with ourselves and one another. Because our lonely world is screaming out for that, God. And if you kind of agree, or if your spirit knows I'm right, but your mind's confused, still say amen. All right, God bless you.